All right. So, as my normal routine is when I go on these walks, is I want to on the Marxist-run college campuses throughout the United States. You probably have no idea about why these riots and insurrections are happening throughout Texas and California. But now you'll have an opportunity to learn what's going on, and I'm going to give you the actual real history of how this stuff developed. And we're going to start actually with the Spanish conquest of the Aztec countries, the Aztec townships, for lack of a better word, and other indigenous territories throughout South, Central, and Norte America. So it'll be pretty interesting. And we'll talk about the Treaty of Hidalgo, and we'll talk about what's really going on here. And we're also going to talk a little bit about, well, actually, you know what? We'll start with, I'm attorney Michael Ehline. As most of you know, I am a California and Texas personal injury attorney, but my background is appellate law and criminal defense and civil rights. So I'm going to do my best to bring this to you from an unbiased perspective, but obviously I'm always going to be on Team USA. You can tell by my cover that I don't support communist insurrectionists. I believe in a merit-based society. I don't believe that stripping successful people of what they've earned with their hands is the right approach. And I believe that communism has been proven not to work over and over and over again. Give me a bunch of 5x5s if you guys can hear me. Want to make sure I got comms before I get going. Hey, Copser 5150. What's going on, USA Badass? What's up, 100%? Hopefully you guys can hear me. I'm entering into a drop zone right now, so shoot me some 5x5s. Let me know that I still have comms throughout this little walk here. Typically, this is where I lose you guys. And so I'm out for my morning walk. Tried to get up a little bit earlier, but unfortunately I got kids and I'm homeschooling, doing everything I can to keep them away from these Marxist college professors and public school teachers who have brainwashed our children to think that rioting and destroying our cities somehow is going to lead to justice and the return of the land to the indigenous people, right? And this is the common theme we hear over and over again, all the way back to, the Israelis, right? Return the land back to the Palestinians, even though it was Israel long before the Romans turned that land over to the Palestinians, who many believe were the Philistines or the Greeks. So it's basically just an excuse to riot, say many, and to cause discord and break down our system. So hopefully you guys can hear me. I just want to make sure I got some, give me some 5x5s, guys. All right, so far I got comms. Hey, Ryan Labs, good seeing you, man. So I don't know if we're going to get a whole lot of people in here. It's probably not the catchiest title, but I had to do it on the fly. And right now I'm moving into, I got the sun in my face kind of a thing, so I can barely see where I'm going. Gosh, it's sunny out here in Nevada today. So, in any event, most of this centers around the history of our public education system in the United States. So, in the 50s and 60s, the KGB infiltrated our public education system. And we can cover this in another video. But the KGB was the Russian Communist Intelligence Services. And their stated goal was to infiltrate, pay off, and do whatever they could to find sympathetic public school teachers and educators, as well as trade unions, by the way, who were sympathetic towards communism. And they were successful in doing that. And ultimately, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the communist Chinese took over where they left off. And their stated goal, obviously, communism, the stated goal of communism is a one-world communist government. Now, the modern-day Marxists and public school teachers and college professors say that, well, none of that's real communism. We still have to keep on waiting for the real communism to work. And so communism basically evolves from socialism, which is where the state controls the means of production. So it's where the government controls everything, and of course the government, who is that? A bunch of bureaucrats, similar to what you have in California. and it becomes generational. And it's basically just going right back to a monarchy where you have a king and you have the nobleman, who in this case you could consider to be the California legislature, right? A single party system. And then you have a chairman like Mao. That could be akin to like a Gavin Newsom. All right, so hopefully you guys are following me so far. So ultimately what happened is because of this infiltration into our public education system, the KGB always knew that if you could get children while they were young, after one generation, you could change the viewpoint of the country. And so they flooded tons of money into organizations like Antifa. They call themselves anarchists, but they're funded by communist China, organizations like George Soros, anti-American, basically pro-communist organizations. And we now know from the last couple of days that the people who are bringing in the pallets, bricks, which the insurrectionists are breaking off and throwing at law enforcement, the people who are bringing in the face masks and the protective equipment for these rioters are all funded directly or indirectly by these communist-style organizations, including communist China. And so the way communist China infiltrated the education system was pretty simple, with money. The same way Rockefeller was able to take over our education system in this country to create a nation of workers, not of thinkers. And that is the stated goal, is a nation of non-thinkers who are compliant. And so the indigenous, what we call the indigenous population, the people who have lived in the United States for the last several hundred years, grew up under an English common law system where we were taught critical thinking. We were taught not to trust the government and to do our own research. Well, the modern day Antifa types, if you try to debate with them or talk to them, they'll say you're a racist, bigot, homophobe, fascist, and shut you down and say, don't talk to this person. So that's where the problem is. You have one system that says, believe whatever the state says, believe whatever our group says. Anyone who disagrees is a racist, bigot, homophobe, fascist, or, you get it. So let's see here. Good seeing all you guys. Good seeing you, Red Hunter. Ranger Rick. All right, so that's sort of how this viewpoint spread so quickly, because basically communist China took over where the Soviet KGB left off. And the modern day public education system, as well as the college system, and I know many of these professors myself, I've tried to debate with them, are 100% lock, stock, and barrel radical Marxists. They support Antifa. Many of these professors march with these guys, and they lead them into these riots. And they're also part of what's called the transhumanist movement. So that's sort of like the setup for what's happening here. And it's based on what many Americans call revisionist history. So remember that term, revisionist history. It's a new version of history that is being pushed by these organizations that are sponsored by communist China. Now, we know that right before President Otto Pen, Sleepy Joe, left office, he used his Otto Pen, or maybe it was Elizabeth Warren, to flood non-governmental organizations, the same ones who had been flooding our country with over 20 million illegal aliens at your expense, for the sole purpose of flooding what's called sanctuary cities with illegal aliens. And the goal, obviously, is the US Census. They know that if they can flood sanctuary cities with illegal aliens, that upon the next census count, they'll pick up at a minimum 10 seats and probably 20 seats or more maximum, which will all go to Democrats, because sanctuary cities are Democrat. You guys following me so far? So they have to be able to now keep them here. And the way they're trying to do that is to say that these poor people who are receiving free benefits, free everything, free cell phones, free hotels, free SNAP benefits, free medical care, are all poor, misunderstood, and we're denying them human rights by cutting off all their free stuff that you and I are paying for. And that's really the argument. Give me a bunch of ones if you follow me. Give me a bunch of twos if you think that I'm a racist, bigot, homophobe, Nazi, and fascist for pointing out these historical truths. I'd like to hear what you all have to say. And I'm trying to start this early enough because we know that most of these rioters and insurrectionists have probably never had a real job or had to feed a family, so they probably won't start waking up till around 12 o'clock in the afternoon, right? So they can go start destroying the city again. So what we're gonna now talk about, as usual, and I gotta tell you, man, I am a big time supporter of legal immigration. My wife's from El Salvador. She had to stand in line. She had to take a test. She had to swear an oath of loyalty to our country in order to be allowed in. And so I grew up in construction. Pretty much all of my friends were Mexican. I dropped out of school when I was 16 and got a full-time job in construction. And so I really have a lot of love, in particular for Mexicans, because I think they're the hardest working people on the planet. But I can tell you without reservation that none of the Mexicans I work with would ever want to go back to Mexico, because it's one of the most corrupt countries on earth. Their government is just horrible, and we're becoming more and more like Mexico. In America, love it or hate it, it still is based upon those values of natural law. So natural law, meaning our rights came from a creator. So it's a battle of two systems between the Roman civil law democracies, where majority rules, the mob gets to decide the rights and fate of the minority, and the common law republic, where the government is bound by the chains of the Constitution and not allowed to interfere with the rights of the individual. They have a limited purpose. So here we go. I'm going to try and I took some notes, so we're going to get into the history of this now. And I'm glad you guys all joined me. Looks like I have my conscience. What's the matter, you here? All right. And what's the matter, you? I will try to answer your questions in a little bit. And by the way, guys, I know I'm wearing a Dallas Cowboy jersey, but I can assure you that I'm straight and I only like females. That's a joke for you guys who don't understand the inside joke about the Dallas Cowboys. All right, so let's get into the history of this really quick so you'll understand what I'm talking about. And again, welcome. I'm attorney Michael Ehline. I am a natural law advocate. I believe in the concept that, as Benjamin Franklin believed, that a democracy is where two wolves and a sheep show up for lunch and decide what's on the menu. And a republic is where two wolves and a well-armed sheep show up for lunch to contest the vote. The well-armed sheep shows up to contest the vote. Okay. So I don't support democracy. It's ridiculous. Allowing the mob to decide whether or not they can confiscate my property, that's insane. That's why the Soviet Union fell. Because when you take away people's ability to have private property rights and you say, hey, the government's going to provide everything for you, nobody wants to work. So of course it's not going to work, because it's human nature. Self-preservation is human nature. And if you read Wealth of Nations by, I believe it was Adam Smith, you can understand that a little bit better. So thank you, Monk 636. So let's get into it really quick. So it starts with the Spanish conquest of the Americas. Okay, so the Spanish conquest, led by Hernan Cortez, defeated the Aztec Empire in 1521 with help from several indigenous groups who were enemies of the Aztecas. Okay, so, and I know this too because my friends were I got to tell you something about Mexicans, at least when I grew up. Even these manual laborers were more educated than anybody that I've ever met in a California public school, and they really knew their history. And so I had the opportunity to learn this from people who didn't support communism, who escaped from Mexico to come up here to get jobs because their government was and still is so corrupt. Basically, California is basically in my opinion, a blueprint for exactly what the Mexicans tried to escape, who I worked with. So Hernan Cortez, with about, I don't know, 120 or 130 Spanish conquistadores. So that's something you guys also have to understand. There weren't like thousands and thousands of conquistadors, all right? The Spanish Empire didn't have the ability to bring a lot of people over here. So what did they do? The Aztec Empire, which had conquered a lot of the Mayan, Incan, and Peruvian empires, Incan, of which my wife is a Mayan. The Aztecs were hated by these people. They were absolutely hated. And they wanted an ally. And so the Spanish, because they came from an advanced culture and they had advanced technology, were able to form alliances with tens of thousands of tribes that were warring against each other to form an alliance to fight the Aztecas. So that is exactly what happened. And so the Tlaxcalcans from the state of Tlaxcala were the most crucial allies. Okay, so the Tlaxcalcans were allies to the conquistadores, and they helped. They basically were at the front lines fighting on behalf of the Spanish. And they had a long-standing rivalry with the Aztecs, who frequently raided them for tribute and sacrificial victims. And so there's a movie that Mel Gibson did, Apocalypto. Take a look at it. It's kind of a loose history of what happened. And yeah, okay, Caesar, good seeing you, brother. So yeah, my wife is Salvadorian, and so look, I love the Salvadorian people and all the people in South and Central America. I think that they are just the most amazing, humble people on the planet. So I'm not here trying to be a white supremacist or anything like that. I'm just trying to give you the history of what really happened. So the Tlaxcalcans provided thousands of warriors. And I know most of you guys don't know any of this because they don't teach you this in the Marxist-run colleges, especially in the public schools, which are definitely led by radical Marxists, just like Susan Bast of Los Angeles, a radical seditionist who hates America, just like Eric Holder hated America, hates America, just like John Podesta hates America, and they are definitely being funded by Marxist organizations, including but not limited to the Communist Chinese. But Communist China is basically the main proponent behind these riots, and you'll notice that they really started to heat up when Trump tried to return us back to a tariff-based system and get us off of the income tax. So what we have here is, hold on a second. Okay, so just to recap, the Tlaxcalcans provided thousands of warriors and logistical assistance for the Spanish conquistadores. All right. Thank you, Ozzy Crosby. It's good to see we have a couple of patriots here who understand. And I'm going to teach you guys about the law of war, about the law of conquest, and how this really works. And we're going to talk about the Treaty of Hidalgo. So we're going to dissuade you from this concept that California is stolen land, okay? So remember that the indigenous tribes hated the Aztecas, and they wanted to destroy them because their wives and kids were being unalived by them constantly. And this was the history of the Northern American, the Norte Americanos as well. Like all these tribes, these Indian tribes, what they call them Indians, that lived in that area that is now populated by, Washington, D.C., Virginia, all the way out to Nevada and California. Those were also tribes that were fighting amongst each other the same way the Aztecs were. And there were always one trying to conquer the other. They were nomadic. They never had any land that they claimed to themselves, other than when the land became unusable, they moved on and conquered another tribe. And they don't teach you this in the Marxist-run education system either. So I just want you guys to understand it's not all as it seems. So now, What's the Matter You says the Fed is behind it. Well, I believe the Federal Reserve Bank is behind it for sure, What's the Matter You. I believe that the bankers want to replace the populations of critical thinkers with people who are intellectually inferior. And we see in sub-Saharan Africa in particular that inbreeding is still practiced. And we know that the United Kingdom wants to bring people like that with extremely low IQs because it's easier to control someone who's not a critical thinker or capable of fighting back. If you give them a free cell phone, a free hotel, free SNAP benefits, they're going to make sure to vote for you and keep you in power. And they're not intelligent enough to really organize an uprising that would be successful. So I do believe that. I do believe that the Federal Reserve Bank privately run institution realizes that as long as they have critical thinkers, people like me with IQs of 160 or higher, it's going to be difficult for them to overthrow the government and create a system similar to what the Aztecas had, where they could just basically threaten people and maintain control. So the other allies of the Spaniards were the Texcocans. And so the Texcocos, it was a major city in the Aztec Triple Alliance that joined Cortez to defeat the Aztecs after internal disputes and dissatisfaction with Aztec rule, provided support and additional manpower as well as reconnaissance, intelligence. The Totonacs were from the coastal region of Veracruz, notably Zempoala. And obviously my Spanish isn't as good as it should be. My wife she hates it because our goal is to move back down to El Salvador at some point. But I'm working on it, guys. So if any of you guys wants to teach me some Spanish, I'm always available to learn. And it always does make me laugh that the people who support this separatist movement, these insurrectionists, want you to speak Spanish and stuff. But Spanish were their conquerors too, so it's kind of funny. But so the Texcocans were another group that wanted to defect from and leave the Aztec Empire. The Totonacs were from the coastal region of Veracruz, notably Zempoala, and they were among the first to ally with Cortez in 1519. So they were also subjected to Aztec tribute demands, kind of like the Democrat Party in California, right? Like we're over 50% of your gas prices or taxes, right? It's the same kind of thing. Like people are sick of it, so they're leaving. But once they are able to redistrict using the U.S. Census with these 20 million illegals, you won't have any choice but to pay tribute to them because there won't be any more red states that could fight back, hypothetically. All right, so also the Huexocinco, this group was from the city-state of Huexocinco, and they also opposed Aztec domination, and they also provided warriors to the Spanish. The Chalca people from the southern basin of Mexico had been subjugated by the Aztecs, and they joined the Spanish to resist those overlords as well. So these alliances were critical because the Spanish forces numbered only a couple of hundred guys. There was only a couple hundred of them, guys. So you guys who were brainwashed in the Marxist-run education systems think there were like millions or thousands of Spanish, and they came here with their Abrams tanks and fighter jets and destroyed the Aztecs, those poor Aztecs, right? No, the Aztecs were akin to the National Socialist Deutsche Arbeiterpartei of their day to the people of their land. So these guys basically, and I don't want anybody to agree with me, I'm just giving you the history because unfortunately guys like Wayne Yates were probably brainwashed in these Marxist-run schools, and they really believe that this stuff, that this is stolen land, and that somehow white people are racist and we need to get rid of the white people and send them back to Europe, which doesn't exist anymore. It's now the Islamic Republic of Europe. I mean, come on, guys. That's where you're going to go. You don't have anywhere to go. All right. So these alliances were critical because the Spanish forces were only a couple of hundred men, and so the indigenous allies provided tens of thousands of warriors to assist in overthrowing the Aztecas. All right, so that's where this all started. Well, what's the matter you're older, and you're from a generation where the public schools still had a little bit of critical thinking, and they taught different things, but they don't teach this stuff in our public schools anymore. So many of these groups allied with the Spanish due to grievances against the Aztecas, and they were paying heavy tribute, just like Californians were paying heavy tribute to the Marxist government of California, for things like trains that never get built, that are in the middle of nowhere, that'll take you like 2 hours to get to the train so you can take the 30-minute trip to Nevada, for example. We know that billions of dollars were wasted on that project, just like billions of dollars were wasted on this internet network that Camel Toe was allegedly behind. So we just all know that it's just a way to pass money back and forth to their political allies at your expense. All right. And so that is why they rebelled against the Aztecas. All right. So now let's get into it. So the next thing is the law of war. So there are a mix of international treaties modernly that establish that once you conquer a territory, that you have to abide by the law of war. And it's basically, the most famous one would be the Geneva Convention. There were 4 treaties signed between 1864 and 1949, with updates called the Additional Protocols. And they're basically a global rule book for war, and nearly every country has signed on. There are other sources like the Hague Convention, etc., etc. Well, why does that matter? Well, that'll come up later. Hey, good seeing you, Stomper. Good seeing you, Chronic Cosmonaut. Love seeing you. Yeah, Caesar Ortega. Yeah, Bolshevism is small hat communism, right? Well, Hitler was a communist as well, and he believed that, just like remember, Karl Marx was an anti-Semite, even though he was Jewish. He hated the Jews. And so Karl Marx, he's another example. He was a Marxist, and so Hitler didn't like the Bolshevik style of communism, and as a result of that, he called it Jewish communism, because of course the leaders of the Bolsheviks were all Jewish, so he hated them. But Hitler himself was a communist. He ran as a communist, I believe, in Bavaria, and he supported the Communist Party until he didn't. He wanted to form his own type of communism, which he called National Socialism. You know, socialism simply means where the state controls the means of production. So in any event, the law of war talks about proportionality, necessity, and humanity. So you're supposed to treat people humanely even in war, etc., etc. All right, and we'll talk about that more later. Now, the law of conquest is the one that matters most here. So the law of conquest simply, and I'm trying to lay a foundation because I'm a lawyer, all right? So the law of the law of conquest, well, actually, Wayne, if you look at the history, you'll see that Hitler was a communist, and that National Socialism basically tried to copy what the Russians were doing, right down to the color of the flags and the propaganda. But obviously, if you went to a communist-run public school or college, you're going to laugh because you've been conditioned to thinking that fascism and National Socialism are the same, which they're not, and that anyone who disagrees with you is a racist, bigot, and a homophobe, because that's how you've been taught, you know, since probably kindergarten by your leftist public school teachers. All right, so let's get into now the law of conquest. So when we think of war, we often picture battles and victories, but what happens when one side conquers another land? Well, that's where the law of conquest comes in, and it's a historical concept that has shaped borders and empires for centuries, right? So basically, I'm going to break down how that works. And so in simple terms, it's the idea that if you win a war and take control of someone else's territory, the land is legally yours, all right? And this is going to make a lot more sense when you talk about how California has invited all these illegal aliens into their country, because it's similar to what Mexico did when they invited all the Tejanos into their country, right? And that's how ultimately they lost about 55% of their empire, by inviting people into their country and then having to deal with the consequences. And we're going to get into that in a minute. So it basically is the law of finders keepers. And it's a rule for war that's rooted into the belief that might makes right. If your army could conquer and hold the territory, you could claim it as your own, no questions asked. When we see that the illegal aliens have done a good job at that with Los Angeles. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. And in any event, it goes back to the ancient empires like Rome and the Mongols. And basically what it is back then and modernly, conquest was seen as a legitimate way to expand your nation. For example, when Spain conquered much of the Americas in the 1500s, or when the European powers carved up Africa during the colonial era, they justified it under this principle, all right? Whether you want to believe it or not, that's the history, all right? That's the true history. That's not the revisionist history that you learn in the Marxist, communist, Chinese-backed public school and college systems that we have in the U.S. That's why, of course, the left wants to give all your kids a free education, because they want to make sure that they're politically brainwashed, like a lot of the commenters in my chat. So if a nation won a war and occupied a territory, they could annex it, meaning they could officially make it part of their country. Often this was sealed with a treaty, like the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo in 1848. And we talked about this a minute ago, and we're going to talk about it some more. The sprinklers are coming on over here at the park, so I guess that'll keep the lawnmower guys away for a while. All right. And I appreciate that. Let me see here. Karen Hollingsworth and USA Badass, thank you for the kind remarks. instead of the empty criticisms that aren't backed by anything other than "you're wrong and you're a liar," which is the typical Marxist response, because they are wrong and they don't have anything to back up their cultic belief system other than what they've been brainwashed to think. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. And by the way, guys, I do appreciate the super chats and the memberships, but buy memberships, because when you buy a membership to my channel, when you're a paid subscriber, what happens is the algorithm sends out these memberships to other people who might want to become part of Team MPE, who are like-minded, who believe in natural law and individual rights, who believe that less government means more freedom, as opposed to the Marxist philosophy, which is centralized control of thought and beliefs, and if you disagree, you're a racist, bigot, and homophobe. I don't want to be under a system like that, so the more people that we bring into my channel with paid subscriptions, the better, because then we can form our own parallel systems, much like the Tejanos did when they left the U.S. after they were invited into northern Texas by the Mexican government. Remember that. They weren't invaders like you're being taught in these Antifa-run riots. They were people who wanted to escape and have more freedom. And so that's who the people are on my channel. All right. So let's get into it. The Treaty of Hidalgo in 1848, which I talked about a little bit, and then after the U.S. defeated Mexico, the U.S. beat Mexico. Mexico ceded California and other territories. I believe it was Utah, Arizona, Colorado, Texas, and California. There may be some other ones. I can't remember specifically, but I do have it written down here somewhere. So, but the conquest wasn't just about land. It often meant imposing your laws, culture, or religion on the conquered people. So think of how the Spanish replaced the Aztec system, which we just talked about just now. They wouldn't have been able to do it. There are only about 150 of them. So they used other tribes who hated the Aztecs, who hated them because the Aztecs were basically what you would akin to the modern Democrat-run state of California. They were basically totalitarians. If you disagreed with them, they would silence you, they would censor you, they would try to shut you up. They would hold you hostage economically with high prices and tribute payments, etc., etc. Good seeing you, Rami. So the Spanish replaced the Aztec system with their own in Mexico, unfortunately. And that's a Roman civil law democracy. So basically that was started, I believe, under the Catholic Church, because it was all, remember, all of the legal systems in the Roman civil law democracies were basically religious. They were Catholic. Okay, in fact, all of the same in the United Kingdom. I mean, our original law schools for the common law republics were actually started in the castle that was run by the Knights Templars outside of the gates of London, and then ultimately, law of the commoners was created. The law of the commoners, which is what common law is. Because before that, we the people didn't have representation in courts. It was basically the Catholic Church and the king. They were the only ones, lex rex, right? They were the only ones, or rex lex, they were the only ones who had the ability to have legal protections. So ultimately, when England rebelled against the Catholic Church, it evolved to where we the people started to get rights. And that's where the English common law system comes from. And that's where American common law comes from. So, in any event, the British reshaped India during colonial rule, for example, and the law of conquest gives the winner almost total control. And that's been going on for thousands and thousands, probably millions of years. That because people are hurting animals. And so, for all of you people who think that you're on stolen land, well, someone 1,000 years ago thinks you're on their stolen land. And the problem is that we're all human beings. So it's natural to conquer and have conquest and try and shape other countries with your belief system, because we are herding and tribal animals at heart. It really has nothing to do with race. So now you might be thinking, this sounds pretty brutal. Conquest led to displacement, exploitation, or worse. The people living in those territories, indigenous groups. In the video so far, look at California as stolen land as well. So Now, the law of conquest is mostly dead in the modern international law. After World War II, the world basically said enough is enough. Let's see here. So what ultimately ended up happening is we had the United Nations Charter of 1945. And specifically, Article 2, Sub 4 said that the use of force is now banned to take another person's country. The idea was now that borders should be respected and conquest doesn't give you legal rights to land anymore. At least that's the idea, okay? But you'll see how that's been changed as well in a minute. It's starting to get a little sunny out here, guys. Let me move over here a little bit. I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as I can. Now, for example, when Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990, the international community, led by the UN, pushed Iraq out, right? And then we ended up going in there. But that's another story for another day. So what do you think? Was the law of conquest just and how the world worked back then? Or should we be doing more to fix this by returning land to people that don't even exist anymore? Because that's, in essence, what the Antifa and these other anti-American organizations in Los Angeles are trying to do. So what do you guys think? So now let's get into this a little bit more. So this all really, for purposes of this conversation, starts with the Mexican-American War, all right? And this is where the anti-American illegal aliens that have been flooded into our country, many of them from communist parts of South and Central America, this is how they operate, and this is what they believe. And it's interesting because you see the parallels with what happened to Texas when they invited people into their country that did not support or take an oath of allegiance to their value system, okay? So the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848 reshaped North America. It gave the U.S. half of Mexico's territory, and it still sparks debate to this day. So today I'm going to unpack the cause of the war from the border disputes and big ideas like manifest destiny. I don't know if you guys know what manifest destiny is. If you went to a public school, you probably just think it's a racist, bigot, and homophobe thing started by white colonizers because that's what you've been brainwashed to think. But it was basically the concept that every conqueror thought, which is that their rule of law and their way of life, like the Romans, was better. And that they were better, they had more technology, and so they thought that they were better. So, and people like Wayne Yates say untrue claims don't make your narrative correct. Well, this is actually history, so I'm just like people like Wayne say that critical race theory is history, where they teach hatred of white people and that all white people are suppressors, right? And oppressors, and that anyone who's not white is oppressed, which is sparking a race war in this country. He says, under his philosophy, that's history, even though we know that it's racist and it's basically a way to divide people, started under primarily Barack Obama. But let's move back into it. So, to understand why the Mexican-American War started, we need to understand only one word, Texas, all right? So in the early 1800s, Mexico included Texas, but American settlers started moving in and they were invited there by the Mexican government to populate the region. Why? Because there was nobody there and they needed to establish territory. And just what you would learn in most Supreme Court cases is rights not claimed are considered waived. So if you don't control your territory, you are deemed to have seceded it. And we see this even modernly under the law of, what is that, where people, oh gosh, it's not eminent domain, it's another one, where people just come in, squatters will sit on your land, and then by operation of law, they ultimately can take it over if they start paying your property taxes. I'm a lawyer, I should know this, but in any event, the Mexican government invited the Tejanos into their country in the early 1800s. And by the 1830s, these settlers, along with I'm sorry, strike that. The Tejanos were Mexican Americans who already lived there, and they didn't like the Mexican government because the Mexican government was incredibly corrupt. They just won a war against the French Foreign Legion as well as Spain, and they were consolidating power. And a lot of the people who were put into power were generals, and they were just as corrupt as the modern Mexican army is. I mean, it hasn't really changed. I mean, history sort of repeats itself over and over again. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. And by the way, thanks for the mods. Yeah, it's incredibly corrupt, Keith B. Yeah. And thank you, What's the Matter You, as well. By the way, guys, you'll notice that most of the people who are my moderators don't really agree with me politically or pretty much on anything else other than natural law and the concept that our rights come from a creator, not from the state. So that's why they're here. I'm not looking for you guys to agree with me on everything. I'm not a modern day Marxist like these Antifa guys who try to shut people down if we disagree on a few things. I believe that if we can just agree on the few salient things, that's enough, and that's a start. And I don't want people thinking just like me. That's not the way it works. Individual rights mean individualism. But unfortunately, if you go to a left-wing Marxist-run public school or college, you've been brainwashed to think if you don't agree with them on everything, you're a racist, bigot, homophobe, or white supremacist, or whatever. So, thank you, Rami. I appreciate that. And thank you, Frugal Pigeoners. Yeah, look for rights, not nationality. And remember, guys, we're all God's children. You know, it's not a situation of race or whatever. That's just what the powers that be use to divide us. So by the 1830s, these settlers, along with the Tejanos and Mexican Texans, wanted independence. And so in 1836, they rebelled and won and created the Republic of Texas. So this is where it gets a little bit messy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to a different area because I can tell that it's getting a little out of control over here, guys. So just give me 1 second. Hold on a minute. I'll go to the picnic area. And I just learned the other day from some BLM people that you can't even use the word picnic, right? Because allegedly that's racist. So it's just getting out of control, guys. It really is. It's just so insane. I even heard that if white girls wear cornrows, like where they braid their hair, that's considered to be cultural misappropriation. Even though my people, the Vikings, the Swedes, the Danes, the Norse, the Northmen, they all wore corn rolls or whatever they're called, the braided hair as well. So it's just all really stupid. Very immature. Okay, so let's get into this. So hopefully it'll be a little less noisy over here and we'll have a little bit more privacy. It's funny, all these people walking their dogs, you're like, who is this guy? What's he saying? All right, and by the way, forgive me, guys. Although I'm wearing a Dallas Cowboys jersey, I am straight. I only like females, so don't culturally misappropriate my sexuality. The cops are 5150, that's what they say. I don't know, buddy. It's pretty dumb. No, I was not a JAG, brother. So one of my commenters, David Bishop, asked, I know he called it corpse, asked me if I was JAG. No, I was infantry. I was an enlisted Marine. I was in construction. I got kicked out of school for fighting when I was like, 15 or 16. And I asked my dad if I could move out, so I lived on my own. I got a full-time job in construction and drove back and forth to go to independent study at night after I worked like 12, 13-hour days as a youngster. Got permission. My dad signed off for me to get a full-time job. And I was on a bus to MEPS. As soon as I got my high school diploma, you can see the staff sergeant standing next to me in my graduation photo when I was on a bus. So no, I'm not JAG at all. I became a lawyer much later in life on the law study program. I'm a legal historian. I spent most of my life in law libraries and in public libraries. I probably read every book I could find at the library. And so that's kind of the way it worked for me. All right, so Mexico was, okay, so let's get into it. So the Mexican Texans, the Tejanos, wanted independence. So in 1836, they rebelled, won, and created the Republic of Texas. So that's what happened. They rebelled and they beat, so the indigenous Mexicans who lived in Texas fought a war against their Mexican overlords and won, along with settlers from America. So it was so basically people that looked like modern Mexicans who hated their government fought alongside the American settlers who moved in to northern Texas, who were invited there by the Mexican government of that day, and they fought a revolution against the Mexican government, and they won. They beat the shit out of them. And so in 1836, they won and they created what's called the Republic of Texas. So contrary to what a lot of you guys think, it wasn't a race-based thing. In fact, just like modernly, like most white people I know, we constantly intermarry with Central and South Americans because their women, in particular, have our same value system of hard work, merit-based systems where we provide for our wives and kids protection, and our wives are allowed to be able to rear our children instead of a public school teacher. Our kids are homeschooled because we believe that less government means more freedom. So that's really what it's all about. So don't think that all the Mexicans supported the Mexican government, because they don't, and modernly they don't either. So just want you guys to understand this. It never had anything to do with race, okay? So the Tejanos and the American settlers who moved into northern Texas, who were invited there by the Mexican government, worked, lived hand in hand, they intermarried. It's not what you guys think. This is all brainwashing by the Marxist-run education system to try to divide people by race, okay? Don't buy any of it. It's all BS. All right, I just want you guys to understand that. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. Now, here's where it gets messy. Mexico never fully accepted the Texas independence. And obviously, certain people in the United States wanted Texas as a state because they wanted border security. There were constant raids by people similar to Pancho Villa that would come across and RAPE, our wives and kids, that would steal and go back, bandits basically, bandidos, okay? ¿Entiendes, Menendez? All right. So obviously the fledgling American states, they wanted border security. Unlike the modern Democrats who just want to flood our country with people that we don't even know anything about, right? Very similar. So here's where it gets messy. In 1845, the United States annexed Texas, making it the 28th state. And Mexico was upset. They were furious, and they broke off diplomatic relations. And that was the beginning of the Mexican-American War. And that's where you learn about the Battle of the Alamo. And then, of course, in the Marine Corps hymn, that's where, from the halls of Montezuma. So the United States Marines ended up having to go into Mexico, and they conquered Mexico City. And the Battle of Chapultepec, which was a Mexican military academy. I'm hoping you guys are learning some history too, especially you Democrats who never learned anything other than that white people are evil, all right? The United States Marines went in and they conquered the Chapultepec Hall, which was the Mexican military academy where their officers were trained. And that is where we earned our blood stripe. Because I got to tell you, the Mexicans were fierce warriors, just like they are today. I mean, I got to tell you right now, Mexicans in particular, the hardest working mother effers I've ever met in my life. And I worked in construction since I was 16. And prior to that, as a young boy, my dad was a contractor. So everybody that worked for us pretty much were Mexican. And that's where I learned, órale pues, chinga tu madre, cabrón, all that stuff, right? And I would have like hot pepper eating contests from the carro de cucaracha or the truca de cucaracha. And I became like, I could eat hotter jalapenos than them. And so I earned their respect, right? Because that was my tribe. So that's why I have a different perspective than most of you guys when it comes to Mexicans, probably. And I don't know about the Aztec past, Amy Elizabeth, because the Aztecs were considered tyrants by most of the indigenous tribes that they conquered. And the indigenous tribes actually allied themselves with the 150 or so Spanish conquistadors to defeat the Aztecas. They hated them. And so, yeah, the Aztecas had the numbers, but I don't know that they were any better fighters than the tribes that they conquered. I just think that they were better at administrating things. Remember, it's the administrators and the technology that wins wars. It's the leaders. And so if the leaders have a higher IQ than the people that they conquered, then naturally they're going to win the wars. And technology and IQ, intelligence quotient, is what wins these wars and what conquers others. Which is why many people say, well, look at sub-Saharan Africa. The average IQ, I think, is like 50 or 60. And then you get up to like Northern Africa, where the Egyptians are from, it's up to like 90. It's similar to what it is in the European cultures, right? Higher IQs equal better technology and the ability to conquer better. All right, so in 1836, again, the Republic of Texas was created. The United States in 1845 annexed Texas at the invitation of the locals because they were constantly getting raided by banditos coming up from Mexico, you know, enslaving their wives and kids, because slavery was still very common then. And yeah, similar to the Fed and the IRS, Rami, that's right. So in response, Mexico broke off diplomatic relations. And the real spark was over where Texas began and Mexico ended. There still weren't clearly delineated and defined borders. So that's how this all happened. So the U.S. claimed the border was the Rio Grande, and Mexico said it was the Nueces River, about 150 miles further north, okay? And so that strip of land was between the two rivers, and it was no man's land, like the demilitarized zone during the Vietnam War, right? Or the Korean conflict, for example. So what ended up happening is in April of 1846, a skirmish broke out. U.S. and Mexico clashed, and I got to tell you, the Mexican army was tough, man. They even clobbered the U.S. Marines. I mean, these guys were no joke, okay? These guys were great warriors. So those of you who have been taught that like Mexicans are lazy and all this stuff, it's nonsense. These people are no less patriotic and no less better fighters than the best American fighters. And they kicked the shit out of the Marines, and I'm a Marine, so I can tell you that, you know, I've got a lot of respect for these guys. So, and they had, I think they were called Lancers. They would carry lances. They were pretty tough dudes. Anyways, what ended up happening is President Polk basically said, hey, you're coming across the border and killing our people, and so you shed American blood on American soil, and he asked Congress to declare war. There were President Polk and the congressional debates. You can look that up in the Library of Congress if you really want to learn about it, because you're not going to learn this from an anti-American Marxist college professor, right, funded by Communist China and the Confucian societies or Antifa. You're never going to learn this stuff. And that is right. You're right, CMM. They're hard-ass workers, and if they want to come here legally, so we can vet them and find out if they're hostile to our way of life and our country first, I'm all for it. I think we should have more legal immigration. I think that legal immigrants built this nation. So yeah, absolutely, I agree with you. Yeah, that's right. Double tap that screen. And again, guys, super chats and paid memberships and subscriptions, go to the front of the line if you have questions. If I see one of those red or orange things popping up, I'm going to answer those questions first. I'm not asking or begging for anybody to contribute to the channel, but it does help. I am a lawyer. I have a regular job. And any kind of donations help when it comes to me justifying doing these shows with my wife, who expects me to be out hunting and gathering for the family while she provides fire support, making sure that there's food, making sure the shirts are ironed, making sure that I got a sandwich, and making sure that the kids are going through with their homeschooling education, away from the Marxist-run education system in this country. All right, so, and that's true. That's true. The settlers are who built this, and the later on, you're right. Immigrants did help, and that is true. All right. So, the revisionist history that you learn in the in the public school system is just so horrific that it's an embarrassment. Anyways, so basically, the Mexican-American War was basically based upon manifest destiny, the belief that Americans were destined to expand across the continent. And Polk wanted not just Texas, but California and other Mexican lands for ports, farmland, and power. Some historians say that he provoked Mexico. Others disagree. So there's a difference of opinion, and you won't get that in the Marxist-run education system that we have in this country today. Give me a second here. And by the way, and I know life under the microscope is going to kill me, but I've been taking these to try to defeat the graphene and all the stuff that they're putting into our bodies and trying to activate with the 5G towers. Give me a bunch of ones if you know about that. All right. So on Mexico's side, things were shaky. The country was dealing with political instability, weak leadership, and a struggling economy after gaining independence from Spain in 1821. They couldn't afford the war, but they felt they had to defend their land. Fair enough. I agree, that's fair. So the U.S. had a relatively stronger military and a growing population that was eager to expand. So why did the war start? It boiled down to three things. There was a border dispute, the fight over the Nueces versus Rio Grande, 150-mile difference border, and manifest destiny, right? That America believed that it was their destiny, like the Romans believed that it was their destiny to expand. And political provocation on both sides, the Mexican as well as the Polk government, sending troops into the disputed zone. And then ultimately, the war ended, and this is where it becomes important. That's right, Cesar Ortega. Right on, brother. And welcome to my channel, by the way, Cesar. If you keep on hanging around, I'll make you a moderator. Guys, give me a bunch of ones for Cesar Ortega. He sounds like another person who thinks outside the box, exactly the kind of person that I want to have as a member of Team MPE. And I'll check it out, SNS Contracting, Alp Nicotine. I'll check it out. So those are basically the three stated reasons that we know of. So the war ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, wherein Mexico lost about 55% of its territory, and the modern-day California, Arizona, New Mexico, and more were basically annexed by the U.S., and the U.S. got its empire, but at a cost. Thousands were dead, including civilians, and tensions that still echo to this day, including all of these wars, these insurrectionists that are trying to burn down Los Angeles to this day. So what do you guys think? Was the Mexican-American War an inevitable clash of ambitions? Do you think it could have been avoided? I don't. I think that it's just part of the human condition. It's just the way it works. Tribalism. It never had anything to do with race, guys. It's all nonsense. That's stuff that you've been brainwashed into thinking by these Marxist-run schools in order to create racial division and hatred. And it's really sad when I hear public school kids say that white people are oppressors and that everyone else is oppressed, because what does that do? It creates people that want to beat white people up, right, or attack them. Obviously, it creates hatred. That's all it does. So it's crazy. It's the most stupidest thing I've ever heard of in my life. We're humans first. We're not races, okay? My children have been taught to think there's no such thing as race, only good and bad people. And I think that we should start sticking to that. So now, why do these LA insurrectionists, and that's what they are, they're seditionists and insurrectionists under US law, and they are committing actual treason. They are violating our laws, and they are engaged in high treason against our country. And I agree with that as well, Wasamata, 100%. Now, first off, who are these LA insurrectionists? Well, Susan Bass is among them. They're Marxists, receiving funding directly and indirectly from Communist China and the Confucian societies. And they've been allowed to grow and prosper. We know that the Clintons received millions of dollars from the Communist Chinese army, from General Charlie Tree. He was bringing in suitcases full of money. And ultimately, the Seal Beach Naval Weapons Station was given to Communist China in exchange. So many things you guys don't know I'm going to educate you on today. And so basically, it's Communist China that's behind this. All roads lead to Communist China, and of course, the Democrat Party that's funded by Communist China. And now somebody just said, never forget January 6th. Okay, let me explain something, guys. January 6th lasted 3 hours. CNN and PMSNBC said that it was an insurrection, okay? The only thing stolen there was one item stolen, and that was it. And we know that Antifa was there dressed as Trump supporters to create division. So to try and say that people at January 6th, many of whom were military veterans and gun owners, try to say that's an insurrection is stupid. There were several thousand people there. A couple of hundred got out of control, and that's all the news media focused on was that. So and the January 6th committee destroyed photographic evidence and exculpatory evidence. Donald Trump's tweets and saying to remain peaceful, his request to people in his government to call in the National Guard were rebuffed, and they later said that, oh, we didn't really think that he meant send in the National Guard. We just thought that was a suggestion. That's all bullshit. So to try and say that was an insurrection and try to compare that to a true insurrection like what happened under BLM or what's happening now in LA is absurd. Okay, it was a 3-hour riot, so it was not an insurrection. Okay, it doesn't meet the legal definition of an insurrection. Okay, so Forget about it, guys. I mean, stop listening to CNN and other communist Chinese subsidized news media. Start doing your own research, guys. I'm just telling you, do your own research. You're going to find that you really don't know what you're talking about. Now, let's get into the LA insurrectionists and what's going on in California. Now we've discussed the history of California, how it became part of the United States through the Treaty of Hidalgo. But let's discuss, and by the way, guys, sorry, it's that time of year where there's a lot of pollen in the air out here, so my allergies are kind of picking up a little bit. Now, what's the story behind all this, and how does the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo fit in? Well, I'm going to break it down for you guys. So first off, who are these LA insurrectionists? Well, they're indigenous groups, allegedly, like Chicano movements, who argue that California's history involves land that was taken unjustly from the indigenous people. And they wave Mexican flags, and we already know that Mexico stole their land too, if you really want to argue about it. So it strikes me as hilarious that they're waving Mexican flags, and they want to return us back to another group of people that allegedly stole their land. So, yeah, J6 is a total scam. It's ridiculous. The whole thing was dumb. I agree with that. And we know now that Antifa was there dressed as Trump supporters, and they're the ones probably who caused most of the damage. And we know that the January 6th committee destroyed all their evidence, and that Sleepy Joe pardoned the woman, the Rhino Republican, Cheney, Liz Cheney, who was allegedly a Republican who assisted the Democrats in creating this false narrative that there was some kind of an insurrection, which is complete bullshit. It was a 3-hour riot, and that was all it was. All right, so the argument is by these Marxist organizations and trade unions, who are the ones bringing in the pallets and all the protective gear to protect these insurrectionists and seditionists who are really trying to overthrow the U.S. government and flood the country with illegal aliens for the purpose of census redistricting to turn the entire state blue, are that from the 19th century on, that this land was stolen from them and that they deserve to have it returned back to them. Of course, they want the welfare benefits, the free cell phones, the free hotels, and all that stuff, right? They're not coming up here to be agricultural workers. So again, in the 1840s, the U.S. was expanding westward. It was driven by the belief in manifest destiny. The idea was that America had divine right to stretch from coast to coast. In the meantime, Mexican bandidos were flooding across into the Texas Northern Territories and pillaging and RAPing the American Texans as well as the Tejanos, the people who were actual, Indian descent, wanted America to come in and defend them because the government of Mexico wasn't doing anything to provide protection for the people who they invited into their country, okay? So just a little warning: you invite people into your country and you don't protect them, this might be a problem. Or you invite people into your country and don't do a background check on them like they've done in these sanctuary cities, you might have the same thing happen to you. All right, so as a result of the Treaty of Hidalgo, huge swaths of the American Southwest, including California, were annexed into the United States. And so in the Treaty of Hidalgo, and we're going to talk about that more in a minute, there was an agreement between the Mexican and U.S. governments that the United States would forgive their debts because we were loaning money to Mexico prior to the war, and we would pay them what amounts to about $500 million in today's money, and that was the end of the war. So the Mexican government entered into a treaty, and now the problem is the United States also promised to honor Mexican land grants, and the people who lived in California who were Mexican nationals were given a choice of basically having their land purchased from them by the U.S. and leaving, or becoming American citizens. And many of them wanted to become American citizens. The problem is that the California government was not honoring these land grants. And why is that? Well, because about a month after this treaty was signed, gold was discovered in California. And so people from all over the world, from Sweden, Germany, not just American colonists, flooded into California to get that gold. People like Levi Strauss started Levi Strauss Company to provide shovels and mining equipment and jeans, for example, okay? So just to give you a little bit of the history. So, and as a result of that, by 1848, the U.S. again had defeated Mexico, and they signed the Treaty of Hidalgo to end the conflict. So, what is that? All right. So, what did the Treaty of Hidalgo do? Because when people say, "Oh, it's stolen land. We have a right to take it back." Okay, let's talk about this. The Treaty of Hidalgo was signed on February 2nd of 1848, and it forced Mexico to cede 55% of its territory. It didn't really force it. It was an agreement. In exchange for ending the war, America will forgive Mexico its debts. And Mexico will cede this land to us, and they signed a treaty. The Mexican government signed a treaty. So that same Mexican flag that these Antifa guys and these anti-American insurrectionists in Los Angeles are waving, that government signed a treaty with the United States called the Treaty of Hidalgo. And that land was given as basically reparations for the war, for the illegal invasion by the Mexican government of the Northern Territories and the killing and pillaging not just of American settlers, but of Tejanos, who were Mexican nationals who hated their government. Okay? And so parts of Colorado and Wyoming were also part of that. In exchange, again, the U.S. paid Mexico $15 million, which adjusted for inflation is about $500 million today. Now, many people say that that's not fair, but under the law of contract, back then it was just a bunch of land. It didn't really have the intrinsic value that it has today because it had not been developed by the so-called colonizers that made it valuable land, and gold had not been discovered yet. So based upon that bargain for exchange, the Treaty of Hidalgo was signed, and it was purchased. That is correct, Mysterium. United States purchased the land. Correct, it was purchased. It was a bargain for exchange. So here's where it gets messy, and I talked about this a little while ago. The Mexican citizens living in those territories were supposed to be able to keep their land and their rights and even their culture. They could either become U.S. citizens or return to Mexico. And that does sound fair, but in practice, obviously, it didn't go as smoothly as we wanted it to. We know that Sutter's Mill was overrun, an American citizen. His mill was overrun by these people who wanted gold. And that's just what happened, guys. It's human nature. They got greedy. They wanted to get gold. So it wasn't the American government that was going after this gold. It was just people who wanted to get rich. And January 6th was not an insurrection. It was a 3-hour riot, guys, and there were no guns. One thing was stolen. A lectern was stolen. Stop listening to CNN XDenX. Give me a break. What a joke. You guys are so foolish. All right, so so what ended up happening is, after the treaty, many Mexican landowners in California faced legal battles to try and maintain control over their land titles. And so the U.S. government set up land commissions, but as always, the process was slow, expensive, and often biased. Well, of course, right? They just had a war with these guys, and a lot of them had lost their family members. So you had a lot of people in government, like you do modernly in the Democrat Party, who hate people as well. So it works on both sides. So basically, some estimates say that over 80% of Mexican land grants were lost within the following decades. So there, there's a problem there. But again, it wasn't indigenous people. Okay, it was people who were Mexican citizens. So that's the problem when you try to have an argument or a debate with these people, these insurrectionists in Los Angeles who are burning our flags and trying to destroy our country and looting all the stores, which there was no looting that happened during January 6th, by the way. Just keep that in mind. No looting, guys. But yet, it's mostly peaceful, right? It's mostly peaceful, even though there's no looting that ever occurred during the 3-hour riot of January 6th. Okay. So now let's talk about the indigenous perspective, because this is where it gets a little weird. So long before, and we discussed this, long before Mexico or the U.S. claimed California, it was home to dozens of native tribes, like the Chumash, the Tongva, and the Ohlone. The stolen land argument often centers on how both Mexican and American settlers displaced these tribes through violence, disease, and forced removal. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo did not address those indigenous land rights, but it had already been gone. It was already gone by the time of of the United States defeating Mexico in battle and signing the Treaty of Hidalgo. It was already long since extinguished. The activist argument is our ancestors were here for thousands of years. The treaty was between Mexico and the U.S. and ignored us. And to us, California was stolen twice, first by the colonizers and then by this treaty. And so they call it stolen land, and basically it's about layers of dispossession. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo transferred huge swaths of land, and that's basically what happened. And so today, the stolen land claim fuels the activism and the communist riots in Los Angeles. And I've shown you other videos on my channel, shorts. You can see most of these illegal aliens are communists, right? They've come from communist countries, and they believe that all of the other attempts at communism just were bad because it wasn't real communism. And somehow or another, they want to do it all over again. And they really believe that by stealing your property and taking away your rights and turning it over to centralized control of a few, like they did in the Soviet Union, somehow that's going to make things equal and better, right? Sort of like trade unions, right? Where one or two people work really hard and the rest vote for pay raises, and they stand around watching the other two people who are working hard, right? You know, what's the famous joke? What's orange and sleeps six? A Caltrans truck? So anytime you take away meritocracy as a basis for earning and a basis for success, you'll have the majority standing around with their hand out looking for free stuff. And that's human nature, guys. Under communism, if everything's free and the government's going to take care of you, why would you work? Think about that. And that's the basis of communism. All right. So in any event, what do you think? I mean, do you think that stolen land label is a fair way to describe California's history, or do you think it requires a deeper dive? What do you guys think? I want to know what you guys think. And so the sources that I used to make this video were the Treaty of Hidalgo, which is available online through the National Archives, historical records like Mexican land grants and statements from indigenous groups like the Tongva. And I don't think there's any Tongva who are participating in these riots. Most of them are from Mexico, and they're intermixed with Spanish blood as well as, with Mayan and Inca and Peruvian, all of whom hated the Aztecs and helped the Spanish defeat the Aztecs. Remember, it only took about 150 Spanish conquistadors with tens of thousands of other indigenous tribes who hated the Aztecs to defeat the Aztecs. So it's not like they were poor people who had their land stolen. And that is right, Bugman. Donald Trump did order the deployment of troops, and it was definitely a legitimate thing to do because, again, this is an attempt to overthrow the U.S. government, and that is the stated goal of the Marxist communists who are seditionists and who have uprised in Los Angeles. Now, basically, that's sort of, in a nutshell, what happened, and I'm going to get on the road. I'm trying to burn off some calories, guys. But now at least you've heard the other side of the argument, because all you people who went to public schools have learned is what your Marxist, anti-American public school teachers, primarily funded and subsidized by the communist Chinese government to try and overthrow the United States, have brainwashed you to think. And so now at least you know the true history, or at least the other argument that you have not been exposed to. And I'm going to show you some video, maybe later today, of other people like me trying to have a civil debate with these so-called protesters who are really insurrectionists who hate America. Hold on one second. If you try and have a civilized debate with any of them, they'll immediately start yelling through their horns or whatever, fascist, racist, bigot, homophobe, don't let them talk. And so they don't want you to be able to have a civilized debate. And these are the same people, by the way, who are the fact checkers, who work for Facebook, who worked for Twitter. These are the people, the so-called fact checkers, who get to decide what's true and false. The blue-haired mafia, the rainbow flag mafia, who want to tell you that boys can be girls and girls can be boys, the transhumanists, right? So that's kind of what's going on. Let me see here. SNS Contracting, good seeing you, my friend. And thank you for joining me today, Frugal Pigeoner. And Cesar Ortega as well, brother. I love having you here. You see, what I like to do is encourage debate. I'm not like these Antifa guys or these Marxist public school teachers. I want people to talk about this and actually engage in an exchange of ideas. Because that's the way that you can learn things from each other and make the world a better place. So at the end of the day, what ended up happening is through the law of conquest, over thousands of years, populations have been displaced and wiped out. The higher IQ people with better technology typically tend to take control. And the Aztecs did the same thing. They had higher IQs probably than the other population groups and were able to divide and conquer them. And so what we see happening now is very similar to what happened with the Tejanos in northern Texas. The United States, well, not the United States, well, under Biden, pretty much, the United States invited, allowed, and facilitated over 20 million, by some estimates, illegal aliens, many of them criminals, bandits, RAPISTSs, and of course, the Southern and Central American governments who hate America emptied out their prisons, like Venezuela, and said, go to America. And MS-13, as you guys know, I'm also Salvadorian, and my kids are dual citizen Salvadorians. Under Bukele, locked up all those criminals and bandits, and so they fled because the borders were wide open, thanks to Joe Biden, into our country. And they have been causing untold damage and harm to our people, to our American people, to our tribe. And they've been causing widespread damage throughout the country. And so we've been trying to, under the current government, to send them back. And it's been very difficult because the Marxist-run news media have been saying, oh, they're just mostly peaceful, they're misunderstood. But no, a lot of these people are criminals and murderers and stuff like that. And so obviously we want to get them out of our country because we have wives and kids and we want them to be safe. The very same people who are trying to curtail our Second Amendment rights are the same people who are flooding people into our country who want to do us harm. So let's get rid of them. Let's send them back and go back to a system of legal immigration, where we vet them, we make sure they're not dangerous, that they're not going to burn our cities down, that they're not going to destroy our businesses like they're doing in Los Angeles. And let's return to sanity, because I, for one, believe that we need more immigration. So what do you guys think? Do you think that when leftists say that this country was built by immigrants, and if we didn't have immigrants, we wouldn't have anyone to pick our food and to serve us at restaurants, don't you think that's kind of racist? I do. And they're not really immigrants, they're illegal aliens, by the way, and they violate our laws constantly. Now, having done workers' compensation law, I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that many of them, I would say the vast majority of them who work, use fake social security numbers. They typically claim 99 dependents. I think that's the maximum you can claim, and they don't pay income tax. And by some estimates, whatever tax dollars they do generate are basically 100% offset by the benefits that they extort from the United States government and the government of California. But for the Democrats, at least, this is a good thing because they're able to use the United States Census to create new districts. So California, once a very clearly red state, the Democrat Party years ago understood that they would be able to use the United States Census to redistrict the state. And by most estimates, California picked up, thanks to sanctuary cities, and a sanctuary city, in essence, is a city that refuses to participate with the federal government in enforcing our immigration laws. And why did they do that? Well, they're not doing it because they like immigrants. They're doing it because they know they can pick up more seats. And that's what census redistricting is all about. And the way it works is you pick up seats in the House by population. And you're not allowed to ask them if they're here legally. Same thing in work comp law. I can't ask a work comp applicant if they're a citizen. I can't ask them about their immigration status. And I'm not allowed to. But I know from when I check Employment Development Department means to see if they receive disability, and I talk to the people over at EDD, they're like, oh yeah, this guy. And they'll be like, well, this social security number has been used by like 15 other people. And typically they all work at the same company, right? So they're all using the same social security number, stolen. They don't pay taxes, most of them. And any taxes that are collected are offset. Any taxes that they do collect are offset by the benefits that they get from the state. And that's why California is going bankrupt, because Newsom immediately said, hey, we'll give you free health care, just come here. Well, why is he doing that? He's doing that because California will pick up more seats and more blue seats. Because why? Because they're going to go to the sanctuary city. The sanctuary city is where they go. And that is why Trump is sending in these ICE agents to get them out, because he knows if we don't get them out by the time of the next census, that the Democrats will have picked up, again, by some estimates 10, and by higher estimates 20 new seats. And it will completely offset forever, the ability of the majority of Americans to have the representation that they voted for. And of course, I think most people realize, in this country at least, that they don't want a communist-style government. Most people don't want they don't want a communist-run college system. They don't want a communist-run public education system. And if you look at the heads of the NEA and the California Teachers Association, far-left anti-American Marxists who hate us. They call us colonizers, and these are the people teaching our kids. So naturally, most people don't want that. And that is ultimately the battle. Now, I'm hoping that you guys learned something today. Let me take a look here. Let's see here. Now, what's the matter? You says that I guess I'm full of it because I know it. But no, the reality is that the leftists are using the census to redistrict the country, and that's how they gain control of California. That's just a fact. And obviously, as a lawyer, I believe reasonable deductions can be drawn, reasonable inferences can be drawn from the direct and circumstantial evidence of what they're doing. Now, being a libertarian, I'm able to sort of look at both sides and understand the arguments. I personally think that both parties are highly corrupted. I'm more of a Davy Crockett type. I think it's a den of vipers. And that's why I believe that we should form parallel systems and start forming our own groups. Start running for sheriff. Replace the blue-haired mafia guys on the school board with our own people, and start becoming activists the same way that George Soros was able to take over the prosecutor's office and the school boards at the local level with anti-American communists. I believe that we can do the same thing by forming a coalition of like-minded people and do the same thing. We can do it through using social media and through having civil discourse and debate. And that's the way you do it. And as you can see, based upon my audience and my moderators, that I'm totally cool with people having a different point of view. And that is what we need to return to, is a day where civility rules the day. So let me just take a look here if there's any questions I can answer. So somebody says, pensioner says, if you were a sheriff, I would have to do it your way, then wouldn't have a breach of peace. Well, my way would be very simple. that the rights of the individual are supreme, not the masses. And that is why America never was and is not supposed to be a democracy. Because under a democracy, the rights of the majority are what matter. Democracy is basically another word for communism. Mob rules, mobocracy, demos, the Greek word for mob. And so the modern Marxists will say, but we're a constitutional democracy or a representative democracy, whatever you want to call it. There's no founding document that says we're a democracy. Most of our founding fathers said on the record that democracies are inherently evil and unjust. We are a constitutional republic. And the argument is that a democracy is where two wolves and a sheep show up for lunch and decide what's on the menu. A republic is where two wolves and a well-armed sheep shows up to contest the vote. So in essence, that's what it is. In a republic, your toothbrush belongs to you. In a democracy, your neighbors who aren't hard workers, who've been brainwashed, think that you're an evil white colonizer, can vote to dispossess you of your property. And they don't respect the concept of individual rights. It's race-based. It's based upon you're an evil colonizer and therefore you should be dispossessed. And that's precisely what's happening in South Africa. You have people who weren't even in South Africa who moved there for jobs and ultimately started the African National Congress, slaughtering the white farmers. And they even have songs about killing the Boer. And so when you start telling children that one part of their population is an oppressor and that they're oppressed, and telling them that that's history, do you really think that's going to encourage unity? Do you think that's going behind a common goal of making the world a better place? Or do you think it's going to lead to riots in Los Angeles? I think the latter has already been proven to be the case. So what do you guys think? I'd like to see what your opinions are. Hey, ladies. So, in any event, I do feel sorry for all the shopkeepers in Los Angeles and in the other states where George Soros and the Marxists are encouraging riots. And I think most of us know by now that their goal is to get ICE, the Marines, or the National Guard to start shooting people so they can try and win the midterms. It's really about. I think if you understand politics, I think you'll understand that they believe this is the only chance that they're going to have for the Democrats to win the midterms, because their ideas are highly unpopular with the majority of people in America. The concept of, again, transhumanism, having people suffering from gender dysphoria, sharing the, and they're not allowed in, right, to protect their daughters. I think most people don't support that. I think there was a poll, a CNN, that 67%, and this is CNN, so obviously it's skewed numbers because they're commies, right? That 67% of Americans don't support the concept of men competing in women's sports. But when they've controlled social media with their blue-haired mafia, fact checkers, and whatnot, they were able to create a false impression of majority. And now that we have exposed that through the Twitter files, and Julian Assange has exposed that, they're running for cover. And so their only chance now is to start a revolution, hope that someone gets shot by one of these government employees, and then win the midterms. And wait for the next census, because once the next census happens, and with their Marxist judges, they can prevent these deportations, all of these 20 million illegals, mostly of whom have moved to sanctuary cities, will completely redistrict the country with the US Census. And the majority of Americans who want freedom, who want liberty, who believe in a merit-based society will no longer have their voices heard. And so that is the argument, and I want to know what you think and what your argument is. What do you guys think? What do you guys have to say about that? Frugal Pigeoner says fundamental human rights. Well, so what is fundamental human rights to you? stealing property from your neighbor who worked hard all their life and giving it to someone who didn't, because that is what communism is. That is what Marxism is. They say, well, you were privileged. That's the only reason you have that. Well, I got to tell you, as somebody who slept on park benches so I could become a lawyer with no law degree or undergrad, that's poppycock. There are two types of people pretty much in this world. People who want to be controlled and people who don't. And people who want to be controlled have slogans like that. Like, oh, we need human rights. We need this. We already have human rights. We have a legal immigration system. If you want to enjoy the protections and wealth of America, you can come in legally through the port of entry like it's always supposed to have been since we've been a republic. And we can vet you to make sure that you're not a threat, a terrorist, someone trying to overthrow our government on behalf of the Mexican government or the communist Chinese. And we can allow you in, you can learn about our history, and you can swear an oath to the republic, like all the legal immigrants have done. And by the way, we still have people standing in line to become legal immigrants, and when they come to the country and get approved, they don't get a free phone, they don't get a free hotel, they don't immediately move to a sanctuary city in California or some other blue state to get free stuff. They come here because they want to work and contribute to our society. America is the only country I know of that allows foreign hostiles to infiltrate and invade our country and immediately get taxpayer-funded subsidies. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. If I was to go to Mexico and start waving an American flag and throw fireworks and drop bricks on their federales, I would be executed on the spot. Same goes with communist China, who, by the way, is funding these riots directly and indirectly. So that's something you won't hear from CNN or PMS, NBC or ABC or these other far left Marxist run propaganda networks, all right? So if you want to hear the truth, keep tuning in on my channel and I will share with you the history and the law according to Michael Ehline in the Library of Congress. And so before I go, just want to look at any. And frugal pensioner, you sound like you spent too much time on a college campus. Let me see here. Yeah, you sound like you spent too much time reading Mao's Little Red Book. Property rights should be able to be passed on to your kin, to your family, and you should be able to put them in trust and own your own property in perpetuity, of course. It doesn't belong to the government. The government serves the people. The government is supposed to be bound by the chains of the Constitution. We're not supposed to be bound by the chains of the government. And when I hear people like you remind me of Robespierre and the Great Terror, where all these people talk the talk, just like the Bolsheviks, until they get into power, or like Mao Zedong, and they get in power and they just start slaughtering all of their political enemies. And that's not what we need. We need healing, like we had before Obama started these race wars. Racial healing and national healing, where we get back to the Republic and we teach our kids a little bit of the history of this country, which to wit is the primary reason for our Revolutionary War is that the King of England tried to seize our powder houses where the colonists stored their gunpowder, because he knew that if they had the ability to uprise in arms against him, against his rule, that he would lose. So that's what really sparked off the Revolutionary War. That's what they should be teaching in the public schools. Give me a bunch of ones if you guys agree. Morning. So, in any event, I do appreciate all of your opinions and comments and the time that you've spent today hanging out with me. I appreciate the super chats and the memberships. I'm very grateful to all of you guys for supporting my channel. Make sure to double tap that screen. Make sure to like and subscribe. And catch me today around noontime. I'm going to go with BZ Watchdog live with a retired whistleblower cop, and we're going to talk a little bit about some body cam footage and the illegal and unjust arrest of BZ Watchdog and how he was able to win in court So it's always nice to get a victory against the unfair powers that be who are trying to destroy our lives and fleece us for money. Okay, so with that being said, guys, make sure to like and subscribe. Like I said, make sure to save, because we never know when the thought police are going to take down this channel. Semper Fi, do or die. Talk to you soon.